Hello and welcome to the Circuit Breakers interview series. I'm your host, Steve Semler, and I'm joined today by Darin Lynch, who's the founder and CEO at Irish Titan, Minneapolis
Hi,
company that builds, grows e-commerce channels.
hi, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you start us off by kind of giving us a little bit of a background about who you are, what you do? Tell me about Irish Titan.
I'm the founder and CEO of Irish Titan. And as you mentioned, not to chew our cabbage twice, but I'll start at the beginning. We are an e-commerce agency. So we build and grow e-commerce channels. I try to speak plainly, and hopefully that conveys what we do. But spoken even more plainly, that means we build the websites for our merchants. That's how we refer to our clients because they're
Mhm.
selling product or services online. And so we build the websites for our merchants with our designers, our developers, our project managers, our strategists. And that's the building part of building and growing e-commerce channels. And then we work with our merchants on an ongoing basis with all of their e-commerce marketing activities like email marketing, paid search, SEO, channel marketing and marketplace marketing. So for example, on Amazon, et cetera. And so that's the grow part of building and growing e-commerce channels.
Yeah. So Irish Titans have been in business since 2004.
Correct. We just recently, depending on when someone watches this or listens to it, just recently celebrated our 20-year anniversary. April 5th, 2004 was when we started. So we have been around for 20 years, which means we've seen a lot, grown a lot, evolved a lot, and hopefully learned a lot.
Yeah. What got you started in this area?
So I did come out of technology, although most agency founders, most, not all, I try not to speak in absolutes, but most, not all, agency founders have one of a few different backgrounds. Either they're a designer or a developer that works for another agency or works in-house somewhere and spins out starting their own work, building themselves, and then starting to build from that. Or they might be at an agency and spin out and take a book of business with them. I came from a corporate IT background that had started to zero in on retail prior to starting Irish Titan. So I'd been accumulating some e-commerce experience. A little more specifically, prior to starting Irish Titan, I was CIO at Second Swing Golf. Before that, I was at Wilson's Leather. And before that, I ran a Lawson software consulting company. For that at Principal Financial Group down in Des Moines. But when I was running the Lawson Software Consulting Company, that's when I had my first exposure. In 1997 was when the project started. In 1998, we launched Office Max's e-commerce site, their very first e-commerce site. And I ran that project as a whole on behalf of Office Max. And way back then, I started to think, there might be something to this e-commerce thing. And that seems barbaric compared to how e-commerce operates now. But then I started to zero in on that and went from Office Max to Wilson's Leather. Now working forward, as I mentioned, launched their e-commerce. Going forward from that, I launched Second Swing's e-commerce, and then I started Irish Titan.
Yeah. And lots of merchants since that.
Yes. Yep. Hundreds and hundreds of projects and engagements and clients since then. I think that e-commerce has gone through a lot of changes and grown and been more and more widely adopted. There's still a lot to come in front of it. So we've definitely accumulated a lot of experience over the years and leveraged my experience. But when starting Irish Titan, and now we've leveraged our organic internal experience with all of our Titans that have been with us.
Yeah. So over the last 20 years, what are some of the biggest changes?
Well, I can answer that in a number of different ways, right? The industry has definitely changed. E-commerce was a fraction then of what it is now, right? Like the pandemic really drove a massive sea change in e-commerce adoption. There had been, in the first 6 months of the pandemic, the rate of e-commerce adoption equaled the previous 6 years.
Wow.
So massive sea change there. So we've seen widespread use of e-commerce by various demographics, different ages, different income brackets, et cetera. So a lot of changes in that regard. There's also been some massive changes on the inside, on our side of the table, I should say, not necessarily the inside, but our side of the table with the technologies we can use and the ability to drive change on behalf of our merchants. So for example, B2B e-commerce, and I'll keep this brief. You can guide the conversation and ask more later if you want, but B2B e-commerce is growing at a faster rate now than B2C, meaning business to business e-commerce is growing faster than business to consumer. Part of that is because of the massive changes in technology over the last 20 years. So I'm giving a long-winded answer to, one of the things that's changed is the first half of our tenure, the first 10 years of Irish Titan, it was difficult to integrate an e-commerce site to an ERP, for example, or a CRM, right? Just because sometimes, if we think about B2B, sometimes their ERPs were pretty antiquated. Well, by now, most of them have upgraded or are upgrading, and the new technologies make it so much easier for different systems to talk to each other. So we've seen much more integrated experiences between an e-commerce system and an ERP and a CRM and a fulfillment, which then lends itself to a much better buying experience, and that helps accelerate e-commerce adoption. And then, of course, there's been a lot of change in people. I have an old basketball in my office that doesn't hold air anymore, but I put my feet up on it when I'm sitting at my chair, and that basketball is older than like 9 or 10 of our staff, 9 or 10 of our Titans. And so I have some Titans that are peers of mine, more age-wise. I have Titans that are younger than my oldest daughter, who's 24. So there's been a definite change in the sort of talent we work with, their expectations of the companies they work for, the leadership that inspires them, et cetera. So long list of changes.
Yeah. How do you typically see the fulfillment and logistics side of things going on? Has that been much easier, or is it just grown kind of with the pandemic and stuff like that, pushing it?
I would say I don't know that it's become easier. In some respects, it has, right? Like the technology's better, et cetera. But I think what has happened is it's become more and more of a priority. It's become easier to focus on it because it used to be difficult to build and launch a site and keep the lights on a site just because the technology was more difficult. I like to think of e-commerce as having, right now we're in an e-commerce 3.0 era with headless mock-based technology stacks. E-commerce 1.0 were things like Magento, Demandware, et cetera. And those were sort of monolithic. And then e-commerce 2.0 was Shopify, BigCommerce, these SaaS-based e-commerce platforms. I think that during that e-commerce 1.0 era, fulfillment and shipping, if I recall the two areas of domain expertise that you mentioned, it was difficult to get merchants to focus on them, even though they focus on them to a necessary degree. But in the e-commerce 1.0 era, it took a lot to just ensure the checkout process for consumers and to get them to the site and make the buying process easy, et cetera. When e-commerce 2.0 came along, that became much easier. It's still a priority, but it gave merchants the luxury, if they built their sites right and engaged with companies like ours that could help them in this way, they could reserve some of their mental energy, some of their time, talent, and treasure to focus then on fulfillment and shipping because it was easier to build a better buying experience. So I think that there have been improvements to it, but the biggest thing I've seen over the years is that merchants now have more mental bandwidth to focus on a better shipping and fulfillment experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It's kind of an end-to-end piece. If wouldn't you have the ability to spread out your focus a bit
Right.
more?
Right.
Yeah, neat. There are a lot of misconceptions that I find people run into with tech businesses. It's like, oh, I want to start a tech business, or running a tech business. What are some of the misconceptions that you've run into that people have had, and how have you handled addressing them?
Yeah, I think that technology is fluid and it has no edges. There are no margins to the paper. because it's virtual. And so I think that that's great in the sense of, or in many ways, there are no barriers to entry. Now, if you're trying to be a chip manufacturer, that's different, right? Like you need facilities and hardware and people, plant, and equipment and that kind of thing. But if you want to be more of a services based or software based tech company, there are no real barriers to entry. All you need is a laptop and Wi-Fi, and it doesn't even need to be your Wi-Fi. You can grab a laptop and work out of a Panera and build and start a tech company. So that's great for entrepreneurial energy, right? I think that sometimes it is misleading to people, though, who take the wrong lessons out of a book like The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, and take the wrong lessons out of that, thinking that they can outsource everything, leverage, an overseas, really cost-effective executive admin assistant, and start a tech company with little effort and little overhead and have it up and running and be really successful in a matter of minutes, right? A matter of minutes, weeks, months, etc. It still takes a lot of work. I think that you have to have a good sense of your model so you know what sort of team you're going to build. You have to double the amount of time you think it's going to take to attract paying customers. And by paying, I mean not just that you're billing them, but they're actually writing you a check. And so I think there's a misconception over the lift that it takes to start it and build momentum. And then continuing that business is a challenge in some ways. But one of my beliefs also is the longer you're in business, the easier it is to be in business. More people know you. You have more and more opportunity to refine your go-to-market and your core principles, and understand where you're on the values disciplines between product leadership, operational excellence, and customer intimacy. So that gives you the opportunity to refine that. And so I think that lift is tough. But then when you get over a few of the hurdles, your business starts to have momentum. And then the trick really is just to keep it on the rails. And you have to be smart about continually sharpening your saw and learning from people like yourself to understand emerging best practices and how you stay fresh.
Yeah. And with regard to that, as the business and the technology constantly changes, you're having to learn and stuff. What do you do to kind of break the circuit of the routine and stay adaptable and innovative?
Yeah.
And with
So I get asked this question a lot in different forms, either that way or another way. Sometimes the question takes shape is, how are you still doing this after 20 years? Because in our space, most people aren't. And I think that my answer is relatively easy for me, the way I'm wired. And that is that every 3-ish years, I feel like my day-to-day, week-to-week responsibilities demonstrably change, if not completely change. And that forces me to stay current. I'm someone who, just the way I'm wired, I have a lot of purpose, and I feel really proud of what we've accomplished, but I'm never really satisfied. And so every 3-ish, 4-ish years, I am resetting our targets, re-aiming for where we are, challenging ourselves to arrive with our service offering, the level of sophistication, et cetera. And so that has resulted in additional service offerings, additional investments into national and international presence, additional investments into various levels of management teams. And so all of that has, I think, forced me to maintain some currency around best practices. I'm naturally curious. I listen to podcasts, I read books, I watch things, et cetera. I'm also a big believer in peer groups and being the dumbest guy at the table and learning from others who are in and out of my industry. And so those are some of the things that I've done to remain fresh. And also, I am very intentional about looking for inspiration and learning outside of traditional venues and traditional media. So I'm not afraid to admit that I'm still a comic book fan. I still actually get the physical comic books. I'm a DC, not Marvel. And one of the reasons I like them is because I can read a comic book in 5 to 10 minutes. And sometimes that's all the time I really have to allocate. And when I sink my teeth into a good book, I want more time, right? Like a half hour to an hour, that sort of thing. But when you read a certain level of comic books, and a lot of people are going to scoff at this, and that's okay. I don't really care. But when you read a certain level of comic books, sometimes you see teamwork principles and leadership principles. And, sports is another much more common example that people cite of where you can draw a lot of lessons from. And I have some top of mind awareness of learning those lessons, absorbing those lessons from various places, not just books and podcasts.
Yeah, yeah, and it's along the same lines. I'm an avid superhero MMO player.
Oh,
So
yeah.
City of Heroes, and organizing teams and raids and role play on one side, and I've got a virtual nightclub on the other side where people come in and hang out after they do their heroic stuff.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
Yeah.
just it's different things.
Correct.
Doesn't have
Yep.
to
I'm a
be.
big believer in that. When I
Yeah.
when I meet with young professionals, because I got my MBA from the University of St. Thomas and had a
Hmm.
great experience, so I have a good relationship with them, and sometimes frequently they refer young professionals over or students going through it, looking for career advice, etc. And one of the things I frequently talk about is don't make the mistake of feeling like you need to leave behind some of the things you find joy in, and that they can't be applicable to furthering your professional growth. Sports or music or comic books or whatever it might be. There are a lot of lessons you can learn from a lot of unique places that sometimes business and some people try to discourage you from holding on to.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Around the technology piece of it, so you've got a lot of titans working for you.
Correct.
Um, as one of the things that I find when I'm talking to tech leaders is that they love the technology. They got into it because they love solving the problems. They love the solutions. They love helping customers or clients with solutions. But they also feel they have to put up with the people side, or the business side of the business. It takes time away from what they could be doing, the part that they love. How do you handle that
So
tension,
what's
I
fun?
guess?
Yeah. So what's funny about that, Steve, is I'm the exact opposite. I was a computer science major for my first year in college, and then I switched to MIS at University of Iowa. I'm a proud vocal Hawkeye. MIS is sort of like computer science light. And computer science specifically and purely sort of bored me. And I'm not trying to imply that I was the next Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or anything like that, but it didn't scratch that business itch for me and some of the people itch.
Mhm.
But MIS still satisfied a lot of the technology itch while complementing that or adding around it, all the business classes and some management classes, et cetera. So I'm actually more inspired and draw more energy from the business side of things and the people side of things than I do the technology side of things. So what accelerated my career prior to Irish Titan was that I developed this mindset and approach and some tools and a tool belt to have a point of view around how to leverage technology to further a business. And that led to Irish Titan's why, to use Simon Sinek speak with his start with why model, his golden circle model. Our why is business first, online second. So we actually focus on putting the business side of it first and understanding our merchants' strategies, what their key priorities are. And only then do we feel like we're ready to bring our talents to bear to accelerate and further those initiatives, those priorities. So that has led me to, for example, our Titan only model, where we do all of our work with just our Titans, no contractors, freelancers, or offshore resources. There's nothing wrong with any of those models I just mentioned, but for us, a people intensive model was actually how I was wired, because I feel like that can deliver a better experience to our merchants. So I'm a little bit unique in that composition that you kicked this question off with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you could wave a magic wand over your business, make one thing better, what would that be?
Ooh, good question. I think that So I'm going to answer with a very um, current situation that I think is more of an opportunity than a problem, but
Hmm.
is something that we're spending some energy on. And I think it's also pretty relevant to a lot of businesses right now in general. And that is to improve accountability
Hmm.
across the organization. We're executing really well right now. We are running downhill with our momentum, which is great. You can still trip and fall, but I'd rather fall running downhill than uphill. And our team is really strong. We do not have a single toxic Titan. We don't have anybody that is violating cultural norms, et cetera. And there have been a few times in our history when that's been true, but this is our first time at this size where I would say that's true. So that's all great. Our net promoter score is strong, et cetera. So feel really good about where the business is. I think that one of the things that we're trying to look at internally with a fresh set of eyes is how we improve our internal accountability to help reveal healthy conflict that will spur improvements and inspire people to share more opinions and suggestions, how our teams will work together a little bit better to make that leap to that next level of change. My team's sick of hearing me say this right now, but I am incessantly demanding change and growth right now because we're ready for it. We've been building for this over the last couple of years with our team and our management team and some of our positioning. So accountability, I think, will help drive that. And accountability in today's environment can be a challenge. With us, we have everybody in the office on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and the rest of the days are optional. The rest of the days, many people are in the office. I am too. I'm taking this from my home office for some scheduling reasons, but I'm in the office every day. So we're still working together most of the time, but with these different teams of engineers and project managers and strategists, sometimes it can be difficult to know who's really accountable. If you have an organization that's remote, accountability is even more of a challenge, right?
Yeah.
And a firm that I am proud to be very close to, named Good Leadership, that does national enterprise level leadership coaching and team-based coaching, is undergoing this accountability research initiative, and I'm on the steering committee, and they're really unveiling some gold in how important accountability is in today's environment and some more ways to close that. So if I had that magic wand, I think I would be looking to close that gap.
Awesome. Just purely by coincidence. The hour and a half before this podcast interview, I delivered an action and accountability course for
Oh,
for my client.
yeah, that's
So
great.
something to deliver. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. It's very helpful. It's very important. People have to grab onto first expectation. There's a bias, having a bias for action,
right.
and then recognizing if you're a leader, what might I be doing to kind of get in the way?
Right. Right. And, as leaders, we need to create cultures of accountability. And that means making it clear. There needs to be clarity around who's accountable for what. There needs to be consistency in holding people accountable to that. But then there also needs to be the positive spin to that. Some of what good leadership is uncovering in a lot of their research is that to some people, to a lot of people, accountability has primarily, if not only, that negative connotation instead of the positive connotation of assuming positive outcome and how you continue to coach along the way. Like, we're all clear about what our accountabilities are, and if we fall short, let's course correct so we can achieve that accountability. And so I think that's something that I didn't really expect before some of that research, and that's helping me hopefully be better with how I'm establishing and rewarding and encouraging accountability.
Excellent. Excellent. What advice would you offer to aspiring entrepreneurs in the tech sector who are starting out or just kind of facing challenges in their business?
A couple things come to mind. I think that, part of starting and running a business is going to bed terrified every night and waking up every morning petrified. And that doesn't really go away. I think that there's a certain level of concern and primal energy you bear owning and running a business. And so you have to make peace with that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just, we have to be wired a little bit differently. I think that you have to understand that a big reason for people to be successful or not is getting up and going to quote unquote going to the office every day, because you're going to have hard days. You're going to have days where you make mistakes, or a client, doesn't pay or implodes or whatever, or one of your employees might make a mistake, and you'll have rough days. And frequently, one of the reasons companies don't make it is after a series of some of those days, they kind of check out and cash in their chips. They're like, this is too hard for me. And that might be because not everybody's wired for owning a business, just like not everybody's wired to be a teacher. And that's a very noble profession that I could never do, right? But if you understand that part of what will help you win is by just getting up and going to the office every day, perseverance and resilience, that'll take you a long, long way.
That internal accountability.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct. Back to accountability. Good point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, neat. Great. Final question for you. And this one is, I haven't asked this of anybody else. The band Kiss, top couple of favorite songs.
Well, buckle up. How much time do you have? So they're Unholy is probably my favorite. War Machine or Parasite might be second or third. Cold Gin would be in the mix. And it becomes really tough. I say Unholy because for whatever reason, I have a tradition for a long time now, because that album came out in 1992. Every time I have a new piece of musical equipment, a speaker or a stereo in a car or whatever it might be, the first song I play is Unholy. And I don't know why. Although it is one of my favorite songs for sure. So I'll start with that one.
Test it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Darin, thank you so much for your time. Fun to meet you, fun to talk to you, fun to get your experience and perspective and stuff and advice
Yeah.
on things too.
Thank you, Steve. I enjoyed the conversation, and thanks for reaching out.
Thank you much. And for those watching the podcast, when you're faced with challenges in your business, consider these tips, this advice. Check out what Darin's done. Have that accountability, the personal perseverance and experience. Think about the idea of how are you wired and what are you going to be able to do to connect with with your merchants, whoever they are.
Right.
As always, I'm Steve Semler at FocalPoint Business Coaching, helping techies be great leaders. Reach out when you need to. Thanks.